book discussion will be chaired by Shri Dammu Ravi. He is currently Secretary Economic Relations in the MEA, and he has also reviewed the book for Business Standard. Over to you, sir.
You know, we all went to the same school, Harsh and I, he's our teacher. Oh, ATM is, he's our teacher. And the rest of the school group is teachers.
Good morning, and Ambassador Vijay Thakur Singh, the DG ICWA, Ambassador Gurjit Singh, the fellow panelists, Pramit Paul and Pranav from CII, and distinguished colleagues, senior colleagues here, ambassadors, excellencies. Thank you very much for this honor, for chairing this session on this important topic. But at the outset, Ambassador Gurjit Singh, I'd like to congratulate you, sir, for a wonderful book. It's, in a way, as I always shared with my other colleagues, it's a rare book. It's a rare treasure because you don't find often books like this which talk about India-Africa relationship in the depth and the width that you have covered. It's amazing in a way. When I was doing the review, I myself learned a lot. So much I came to know about our relationship that I was not aware previously. But I think few things we need to understand how the book has been attempted. One is that the author has put the relationship in context, but he's also been very frank and honest. That's what I felt, when you're analyzing the relationship. It's not everything good. Sometimes when you have to say that there is a problem, he didn't hesitate to say that there is a problem. I think that's how we approached the book. And second thing I noticed was exhaustive research. I think you have met so many people, so much reading. It's amazing depth you went into the book. I think that again strikes use of graphs, data. It is just not the feeling. I think he went deep into the subject and he used the data, graphs, analysis, and then he was able to make his case very strongly. The two phases that needs to be recognized here. One is that the post-independence part of it, the second half of the last century, how he dealt with the relationship, the evolution of India-Africa relationship. Again, they're largely driven by shared understanding, shared commitment on the freedom struggle, the nationalism, and there again Mahatma Gandhi's ideas, his ideals, which become somewhat underpinning the relationship in an inexorable link between the two region of Africa and India. Then I think the author brings out a very important facet. The dynamics of the relationship changed in the 21st century. And that marks 2001, where he says how other countries have started to look at Africa. And India is not the only country. Many countries have been started to realign their interests in a manner that they've seen Africa as truly the 21st century continent with immense potential. I think at a time when the world is looking at Indo-Pacific being the fulcrum of the world economic activity or the center of gravity of economic relationship, ASEAN being dubbed as the 21st century region, but I think Ambassador Gurjit Singh had brought focus to Africa in his book, saying that that is the continent of the 21st century. And so there are many players. We think of India resetting relationship, but I think Japan, EU, USA, countries in Europe, they all have started to focus on Africa, including Turkey. That has been brought out very well. The dynamics of the relationship, the robustness of India-Africa relationship has been contextualized in the India-Africa Forum Summit. And that has given a platform both sides to engage more deeply and more intimately. And that has, in the recent times, become very, very strong. And that is, again, the way the relationship has evolved, not merely the development cooperation, that also is underpinning the relationship, but the leadership commitment to Africa is very clearly comes out here. with visits at the highest level. The Prime Minister himself has visited the region. You had the leaders coming from Africa to India, the ministerial interaction, and the several level official interaction have also taken place. So then our seriousness, our interest in the region is also conveyed in the way we went about opening missions in Africa. That also has been very clearly brought out. And it's not one way. You've seen the African countries also started to open the missions in India. So the footprints on both sides have expanded. Interesting facet I noticed in the book is that there is no comparison. He has not made any comparison between one country and another country, how they engage with Africa. When you read it, you get to know what other countries are doing, but it is not a comparison between what India and China does, for example. Because the approaches are very different, the objectives are very different. But he also made it a point that there is enough room for n number of players on the African continent to be able to do mutually beneficial partnerships in the way forward. So the one chapter, several chapters deal with India's development cooperation assistance with Africa. Of course, the lines of credit have been very critically analyzed. The impact assessment has been very deep, I must say. And while we believe that the South-South cooperation commitments and principles are adhered to, but there are problems, and that he has very clearly brought out. What are those problems, and how we can make our delivery mechanism much more nimble-footed and expeditious. So some ideas the author has shared. And at the same time, he also believes the shortcomings in our economic partnership and how we can overcome the shortcomings. So there he talks about actually access to finance is the most critical part. And lack of that is actually constraining the relationship. And this is now for policymakers in the government as to how we can actually bring this access to capital and finances, and how do we make finance available for big projects. Is the buyer's credit, beyond lines of credit is an answer. Concessional financing loans, the trade financing facilities, all these things have been dealt with at length, and in a very interesting way. He tackled these subjects. Then comes, very briefly, I would like to touch upon the visionary approach, the post-COVID times. How do we look at our relationship moving forward? What should be our priorities? At a time when the world is moving towards a multipolar world, there is immense space for many players, and it is also in line with our own strategic interests to engage with Africa. So here we see the interest in the healthcare, which suddenly become a priority for all countries, and how India can engage with African countries to be able to take forward cooperation in the health sector, which involves creation of colleges, institutions, medical colleges, hospitals, nursing institutions. There is so much possibilities there. Similarly, energy sector. Oil and gas is becoming increasingly so important as countries are strategizing to move towards net zero goals. Africa still becomes a very important solution for energy security, and so is the case of food security, because few companies have gone ahead and producing food products, but we haven't done it in a large scale. And there again, the African landmass and the fertile lands that are there are in fact a solution for the world food crisis, but we have to look at it more strategically. India's flagship programs are again very good way to look at how some of the success we have achieved in India, can they be introduced in Africa for solutions there, finding solutions. The most important point that Ambassador's book touches upon actually is the trilateral cooperation. Because you can't do everything bilaterally. We have to be looking at doing this partnership with many countries together and trying to synergize our strengths to do a large number of projects for mutually beneficial partnerships. There is one thought I would like to leave behind, is in terms of how we see Africa. While we look at Africa as a continent, 54 countries, but I think the strategizing should be more granular in terms of how you see sub-regional initiatives that India needs to see. And again, for policymakers, that's a very good input, I would say. Africa is today aspirational. We have to understand the way Africa is looking at the world. It is not so more what what it was 50 years ago. It's a truly aspirational, 1.2 billion people with very, very young population, much younger than Indian population here. That's a very strong point there. And resource-rich countries. Now, how do you do a resource utilization that could be a win-win proposition for both sides, not being neo-colonialist? So these are the ideas that have been very well covered in the book. I thank you very much, sir, and congratulations for a wonderful book. And I'd like to say that all our missions in Africa should own this book. And all our officers should be able to have a copy, read it thoroughly, and understand how we should engage with Africa. Thank you very much. I'd like to now request the Ambassador Gurjit Singh to speak about the book, in part at least. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dammu Ravi, Secretary, ER, and it's very evident you read the book very thoroughly. So sometimes it scares you if somebody in office has read your book so thoroughly. But the good thing is you have good things to say. So I'm on a safe ground. The other safe ground was that today the print told me that they are going to review my book. So I was scratching my head that on the day of my launch, the print, but fortunately they have picked the chapter which deals with the success of Prime Minister Modi's Africa policy and published that. So I am very happy that that has come out. So I shall not speak about that. But you know, Nivedita is here, Director Research in ICW, and I owe her a great debt of gratitude because a lot of my work on this book started with her and we bounced ideas. And one of the things she told me was that, sir, nobody has ever checked the impact assessment of how Africans think of us. So I could not travel to Africa because of the pandemic, but I still used all my old contacts and I did a survey among Africans on how they view India as a development partner. So thank you for the idea, Nivedita. Now, this is as Appendix 1 in the book. And I have been very upfront of what kind of people I interviewed, how many there were. So this is not a basis for a scientific survey, but I think impressions it gives you clearly. So I just want to use my time to say, first question was, do you see India as an effective partner in terms of economic engagement? Overwhelming majority, 81% of respondents said yes. 8.3 said no, 8.3%. Another question was, is India's development partnership with Africa, which is 3 tiers, African Union, regional communities and bilateral, well understood? And the overwhelming majority said somewhat. Because people still like to believe that what they see bilaterally is what they see. What comes through the AU or the regional community is rather poorly communicated within Africa. So therefore, what we may do with the AU or regional community is not so appreciated in Africa. That seems to be the reality out of this. The third question was, does India follow a path of partnership that is different from other partners? Now, this is something that we are constantly saying that we are different. But I wanted to hear from the Africans, are we different? 82% thought India's policy was effective. 34% thought it was well understood. But 46% thought it was clearly different in its approach to Africa. 31% thought it was somewhat different. So about 77% saw the difference. But 23%, which is still large, did not think it varied from other partners. So there is almost a quota which does not see the difference between India and other partners, though we like to think that we are very different. It is clear that India's policy is appreciated but when compared in detail, it is not seen as being very different, but yet it is viewed as being effective. So I think that is the message that I got from here. The fourth question was, which part of the partnership with India is the most valuable for Africa? You know, 66% chose human resource development, the scholarships, the iTech program, capacity building. 66% said this was the most significant part. 60% said Indian FDI. And as the book shows, Indian FDI was actually never government policy. So, but 60% of African respondents said it was the most effective part of your relationship with us. These preferences were far higher than for the LOCs, which were supported by 23%. Closely followed by the support shown for venture capital and startups by 21%. 21% respondents valued Indian startups and venture capital, which again I say is not part of government policy, but is happening. And this is being noticed. 39% saw cooperation in agriculture and food security. I think the next session will like to note this. 39% saw it as a valuable asset of the partnership with India. A few other mentions were health sector, PPP projects, and social impact projects. Next question was, what is the enduring image of India as a partner for Africa? How do Africans view us as an image, one short image? Most people, 65% said dependable and friend indeed, a friend indeed. Whenever you have required, they are there. So these two were the dominant themes, 65% each. Then came 27.5%, which said timely intervention. Timely intervention. 9% thought India was a laggard. I mean, we are not doing very much, laggard. And had frittered its options by being slow in deciding things, implementing them, and not grasping opportunities. 9%. 11.5% saw India as exploitative. Significant, exploitative. And the dominant pair, East Africa. So most respondents out of this 11.5% were in East Africa. Odd, no? We don't think like that. Some respondents said that they felt all partners were exploitative, not only India, all partners. So I think it was a generalized brush that they were hitting us with. And that was the nature of partners dealing with Africa. The laggard theme was more prevalent in North and East Africa, the exploitative one more in the East. The dependable and friend indeed image had support across East, West, and South, though tinged with a few occasional sharp responses. The sixth question was, what opportunity emerges for India through the Africa Continental FTA? And most people saw it as creation of value chains and FDI. These were the two things that Africans thought India should do after the creation of the Africa Continental FTA. Where the DFTP is concerned, you know, it looks that it was a specialized scheme, and the interest in it was only by those people who were looking at it. So there was a pretty low awareness level at 40% of the DFTP scheme. And despite the fact that a fairly large number of respondents were actually from chambers of commerce, but yet the DFTP scheme was only noticed by about 40%. Please name any partnership program, up to 3, that India has with Africa. I wanted to see what is it that India is doing that people remember. This generated very diverse responses. Some clearly recalled programs by name, while others recalled the themes. The biggest recall was the iTech program, biggest recall. And its theme of capacity building, human resource development, and practical training. 41% of the respondents chose iTech program as the best recall of an Indian program. The scholarships and education programs, some through ICCR, some outside, recalled by 27.5%. Both these categories of responses show the major impact of HRD on the India-Africa partnership. And the last question, which was continuing with this, the LOCs and concessional recall, finance were recalled by 17% of the respondents. Impressive figure, but not as much as I thought, because you see, in all our literature, the lines of credit are our spearhead. But to the common African, it is still the HRD, which is more important than the lines, because the impact we have not assessed. Agriculture was recalled by 17%, India-Africa foreign summits by 13%, the Pan-African E-Network, I was very happy to hear this, and FDI by 11% each. Solar energy and partnership for SDGs, 10% recall. So these were the brands which India has successfully implemented in Africa. And there were the references to the CII conclave, and small numbers recalled the health sector partnership, defense engagement, infrastructure development, innovation, and one respondent also mentioned the International Day of Yoga, and another one mentioned the art of living. So I don't know whether they were personal to me that I was standing on my head, but they have certainly had. So I'm going to stop here just to give you an idea that based on these assessments, I then drafted some of the suggestions which Mr. Dammu Ravi has alluded to. So it was not that I made them made them up. They were based on what I thought were the hardest facts I could collect, a survey among the respondents in Africa. With that, I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. It's a very interesting facets you brought out from your book. Now I call upon Shri Pramit Pal Chaudhuri, who is the foreign editor of the Hindustan Times, to make his remarks, please. Thank you.
Several years ago, on one of my other standings as a fellow at the Ananta Aspen Center, I had to edit a book on India-Africa relations. The book, unfortunately, went over schedule. I couldn't make it in time for the Indo-Africa Summit, which is what the original plan was. But one of the key reasons for that was that a lot of the authors struggled to find information, the detailed information that now, unfortunately, is belatedly appeared in Gurjit's book. And I wish the book had been out then. We would have actually printed our book on schedule. And now that I hear part of it was written when you were standing on your head, I'm even more impressed. So I'll just talk a little about Africa. Some of you know me, will know that I have a strong personal link with Africa, having spent almost my entire childhood there, having visited 18 African countries. My first language as a child, since largely forgotten, was actually Amharic, because I spent the first 5 years of my life in Ethiopia. And I graduated from high school from Liberia before I went on to college in America. So it's always been a personal interest to me that the relationship between India and Africa should keep expanding itself to something much larger than it is. Gurjit's book has gone very deeply, in fact, incredibly deeply, into what the government-to-government relationship has been, and especially about the development partnership. I'll just talk a little about where I hope we will be able to go in the coming decades. The Columbia University professor Adam Tooze, the economist, recently wrote an essay for Foreign Affairs magazine. Tooze is a bit of a public intellectual, but he likes to think out of the box among academics. And he basically said, if you look at the demographics, if you look at the resources, if you look at Africa's size, the next century is Africa's. And he said, if anybody doesn't get this, just look at the numbers. Just because bits and pieces of Africa get bad news because they're in civil war, that doesn't matter. Africa is so massive that large portions of Africa can prosper and do very well, even while other parts of it are not doing so well, as is the case with Asia, as is the case with the Americas. And I think this is something that really needs to be understood a lot better, especially, I think, in the Indian private sector, that Africa's future, I mean, not even just a future, even if its present potential is absolutely core to being able to be a success in the coming decades. And I think one of the biggest areas where I think we miss, especially in India, where Africa has been making enormous strides, is in the digital economy. Gurjit mentioned that Africans already recognize the importance of India's capacities in startups and venture capital. I'm not too certain that's the case in the other direction. There's already a very good startup venture capital ecosystem. South Africa obviously leads the way, but Nigeria is very close by, Kenya, Rwanda. India itself is partnering with Mauritius and developing a very large economic ecosystem there. But there are many other parts of Africa that are remarkably good. And if you dig deeper into the smaller cities and towns, places like Ibadan in Nigeria, Ghana, for example, have remarkably healthy, vibrant startup systems. A couple of examples, statistics I'll just throw out. 50% of all the people in the world who use mobile payment systems live in Africa. It's by far, its population is ahead of everybody else in the use of mobile payments. Companies like M-Pesa and so on are equal or on par with companies like Paytm and so on in India. If the African Continental Trade Agreement is eventually ratified and implemented by all of its members, that would create the single largest digital economy in the world in terms of the number of countries and the terms of geographical spread, because part of that agreement requires a standardization of digital lines up. While the startup capital that's coming into Africa was just about $5 billion last year, if you look at the growth figures, you realize that Africa's startup ecosystem is growing at 600% faster than the global average. There's literally no other part of the world where that type of growth is taking place in terms of so on. African countries invest in India's startups. If you've bought something on OLX, if you've booked a ticket on GoIbibo, if you've ordered from Swiggy, these are all companies that are partly owned by African investors. And I can go on, that's just one of them. One company, Naspers of South Africa, its startup investment fund process has $6 billion of investments in India's digital economy already. That's one company. So we need to be looking, in my view, at a lot of this, not just in terms of awareness, but we need to be doing road shows. Indian investors and entrepreneurs need to be meeting their African counterparts, perhaps digitally at first, but later physically, to start to get some sort of an understanding. Both of us tend to look at the West. We tend to look at California or even Israel or London, but there's no reason why there shouldn't be a connection between the two. And in part because a lot of the products and innovations that we both produce, both Africans and Indians, are actually geared for our own economic conditions. This is definitely true in mobile payments. But for example, what we do in India does, for example, and I think this is going to be one of the big accomplishments hopefully in the next 1 year. If you look at what America has allowed to happen is a domination by 4 or 5 huge companies, a big tech monopoly. The Europeans have gone in the other direction. They've made privacy, data privacy, so important that they've killed off almost all innovation. There's no European e-commerce company or digital company in many spaces of any consequence. The Chinese have gone in the other direction, of course, where everything is effectively controlled by the state, and it's now controlling even what was allowed in the private sector, Alibaba, Tencent, are slowly being crushed by the single-party system, and whatever data you have is not. If in America you're concerned about Amazon knowing too much data, in China it's all going to one institution, the Communist Party. So India, I think, is developing in many ways an alternative ecosystem in which we are focused. I mean, if you saw that first in the rise of the unified payment interface, where we basically said all of the fintech companies of India, all the payment systems have to be all in one, go through one system, one interface, so the consumer can choose any one that he wants. And you fight on the basis of the quality of your algorithm, the quality of your brand and your service, rather than the ability to control a person's data. Second, if this happens now when we're planning with the open network on e-commerce, that's exactly the same thing will now happen for e-commerce. And in each of these cases, I would argue India is especially among a large country, a major economy, right at the forefront of this kind of innovation. And this is something I'm hoping that we can then show this to African countries and other developing countries and emerging economies as a path that you can take that is different from what the West and China have taken, and at the heart of it is not just this, that individuals get to control their data or be certain about where their data is going, but also that it leaves a space for innovation for small entrepreneurs in the future, that you don't have to be worried about being completely dominated by a set of companies there. So I'm hoping that that's one of the areas that I think India, partly because we are still in the process of developing, we underplay, but it's also part of the story that neither side, especially we in India, don't know as much as we should about what's happening in that space in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you. Brilliant, I think.
Thank you very much, Pramit, for bringing in a very different aspect of a relationship where there is immense potential, particularly the digital space, and so much that the two sides can do. Now I request Pranav Kumar, the Head International Trade Policy Division, CII, New Delhi, to give his remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. And I would like to take this opportunity to once again congratulate Ambassador Gurjit Singh for bringing out such a very rich book on the subject. I must say, and I'm also thankful to you, sir, for very generously quoted and referred CI in the book and acknowledge the work which CI has done in terms of building the strong business relations between India and Africa. But a lot of credit goes to you also because you have been the guiding force when you were in the government initially, and after that also you are giving a lot of guidance in terms of your knowledge, wisdom and all. So that is still going very strong. That is one event. And hopefully another 1 month or so we will be holding another summit this time physically. One of the major the distinctive feature of this book is that it presents accounts of the last 2 decades. That is very important to note. And there are 4 aspects. If you look at the last 2 decades, since 2000 and now this is more than 2 decades, 22 years exactly. So what we planned with regards to India-Africa relations, what action we took, what achievements we have met, and where are the gaps. So all 4 aspects you have covered very nicely in the book. Because in terms of the initiatives like whether it's a Focus India scheme, government LOCs, duty-free tariff preference, India-Africa Forum Summit, all have been dealt quite well in the book, and their action and achievement. And of course, more importantly, where are the gaps, because that would be extremely important in terms of taking the relationship forward, because things are very dynamic. It's unpredictable also, looking at the global environment. So it's very important for us to, when we plan our India-Africa Forum Summit, the 4th edition, so this book will be a very good reference point to develop the agenda and take it forward. I would not like to speak on the point which have already been discussed in detail by all the eminent speakers who spoke before me. But a couple of points which I would like to speak. One, of course, on the development cooperation, which you have dealt very in much detail in the book. And of course, the usual, the key features of the South-South cooperation work. For instance, it is mutually beneficial, a demand-driven process, no conditionalities attached, it respects the sovereign decision making and all. So all those are, of course, well appreciated globally. And in fact, no one has questioned that India's honest intention to develop to build the India-Africa relations on the mutual beneficiary terms and conditions. But one very important point which we have raised, and that extremely important, that South-South cooperation supplement the North-South cooperation, because that is the point which always miss, because that cannot, South-South cooperation cannot substitute the North-South. The point which I am trying to highlight, because still the Western countries, the northern countries, they are resourceful, they are the owner of technology, because on these two fronts they have advantage. As regard the South-South cooperation country like India and all, we have the best practices, and that's what we have been sharing. That's why you have seen that the development cooperation from our end that has highlighted more on the human capacity building aspect, institution building aspect, but not much on the technology front. So that is what I said, that we cannot put the South-South cooperation and North-South cooperation into watertight compartment. And that has given the birth of and the concept of the trilateral development cooperation, which again we are trying to promote. So that's why we have partnered with Japan, we have partnered with UAE, France, UK and all, how we can build this model of development cooperation and try to help and build a strong Africa. Now, my next point, again, that comes from your, of course, the 5-6 questions which you have raised. And one important aspect is the African continental free trade area, which is extremely important. That is, and we must commend and congratulate Africa that in spite of all the disruption and the unpredictability which we have seen over the years, they are going very steadily. And I must say that continent-wide economic integration is not an easy task to accomplish. We have seen the European economic integration that took 50 years. It started in 1952 and completed in 1999 when they have become the common market, adopted a new common currency, euro. So we have to wait and watch. We have to be patient. So Africa, again, a big continent, 55 odd countries. So of course, they are going very strongly, steadily. But at the same time, it's again our own collective responsibility to help and partner with Africa to achieve this noble and ambitious task. You also mentioned about that response which came from African side, that creation of value chains and FDI. And that is where the role of the private sector comes. And when we talk about creation of value chain, it is extremely important if you look at the global trade particularly. It is the global value chain and global production network which is driving the both export and import trade. 70% of trade globally happening in the value chain. So if you are a part of value chain, then you are a major player in global trade. If you are not a part of global production network, you are out of the race. So that is extremely important. And what is important in case of African continent, and when we are trying to integrate themselves, because that is what the point which I am also trying to work with Indian industry, trying to create awareness among them, because some of the issues they have been raising for many years in terms of the hurdles or the problems in enhancing their business engagement, in increasing their investment and all. Africa is not a very unified market. So, and this agreement, of course, it will take time, as I have already said, but this is moving in the right direction, and that will help in integration of the market. Because when you talk about investment particularly, that is in manufacturing. So, of course, we have to keep in mind the economies of scale. So one individual country may be small, that may not be sufficient in terms of the size, in terms of scale, for any big investors to take a business call or to invest. So, and that is my own personal experience. I have interacted with many Indian companies, and they have raised this point again and again, that if even 4 or 5 countries get integrated, then provide us the economies of scale. And I'm sure this agreement would give that kind of enabling environment, and that will encourage Indian companies, Indian investors to invest more, particularly in manufacturing sector. Because when we talk about value chain, it has to be in manufacturing, it has to be in services both. Another point which I would like to, again, in the context of Africa, in the last 1 decade or so, there are 4 agreements which globally were simultaneously being negotiated. One was the TPP, that is Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. Second was between the US and Europe, that was the Transatlantic Trade Investment Partnership. Third was on RCEP, which Sir was leading from the commerce. And fourth one was the African Continental Free Trade Area. So when we look at the progress on all these four, the TPP took off minus America. TTIP, that is Transatlantic Trade, that never took off. Third was the RCEP, it again took off minus India. But only the African Continental Free Trade Area that is moving in a very strongly manner. So that again, we must congratulate all our African friends and the people who are here from Africa. So we are really hopeful that this agreement, particular African Continental Free Trade Area, that will bring a big turnaround, big positive trend in the developing the business relationship. My last point would be India is again getting a G20 presidency, as Mr. Singla also mentioned, that he's the chief G20 coordinator. And there we are trying to pick up some of the points, some of the issues in terms of agenda, which are, of course, main interest to developing world, and that includes African also. And in the context of G20 also, we have been highlighting again, because if you look at the composition of G20, North America, South America, 5 countries are member of G20. In Europe, again, there are good number of countries. Asia, again, right from Saudi Arabia, Indonesia, India, China, Japan, Korea, all are member of G. But entire African continent is just represented by one country, that is South Africa. So we have to factor that when our presidency comes next year, that African agenda, because that's a kind of opportunity for us. In fact, there are many other countries they have done. For instance, when Germany was the presidency, they came out with Compact with Africa, and that's still going on. They're trying to bring more and more countries who can work under that scheme with African countries. So, so I would stop here, sir, and look forward to any question. So I would be happy to respond. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pranav, for your touching upon different elements of the book here, in particular the role of CII and the importance it played in enhancing India trade and investment linkages with Africa, and also trilateral cooperation. I think a very important point you touch is the North-South cooperation, how important it is in terms of technology actually influencing the change. And of course, Africa-wide free trade agreement that has been just been concluded, and how India can benefit by engaging on that. G20, of course, we have to factor in the importance of Africa and the G20 when India takes over the presidency. Thank you very much for the panelists for your remarks. Now I open the floor to the audience, participants, for any questions that you may have, observations or clarification. Thank you. Okay, ma'am. She was asking.
So I look forward to reading the book. And
Ma'am, could you please introduce yourself and then raise it?
I'm assistant professor at Bennett University. I teach media studies.
Right.
So I was curious to know about what is the nature of assistance in B2B or G2G way to improve the conditions of women and children in nations like Zimbabwe, Malawi, the Gambia, Liberia, and Tanzania, especially these countries, because I believe they have a large percentage of population in the women labor force. So has that been touched upon in the book?
So we'll take few questions and then you can answer. Yeah. Yes, ma'am. Yeah. Take the mic.
I'm Nandita Bakshi. I served earlier in the government, and now I have a consultancy in public policy. I have a question to Ambassador Gurjit. You, of course, will be reading the book, which promises to be a great read. We had touched upon this earlier in a discussion with you, and incidentally, we are batchmates. So I want to check that what is the perception of African countries to LOC effectiveness? Because you've just said that about only 23%. Because we are trying to help some companies to go into Africa, and there seem to be many glitches. So, but I do want to know what is the perception there. Thanks.
Yeah, I'll come to you.
Sir, my name is Dr. Shahid Siddiqui. I'm a journalist as well as development analyst. I have a question from Pramit sir, one and another from Ambassador Gurjit Singh. That, as you told that most of the people, they are using the digital payment, almost 50% of the users are there in Africa. How it is that, how the misinformation is affecting, that misinformation or, you know, the cyber security challenges is affecting those kind of services. Number one. Sir, to the Ambassador, sir, how this cyber security challenges have impacted or is going to impact further this kind of trade or investment or whatever the services that we are telling that we are growing with 600% of the startups initiatives and all. How it is going to impact in whole Africa as well as the other part of the country?
Thank you. Ambassador.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. My name is George Barclay Nguhe. I'm from the Nigerian High Commission. And I was quite impressed with the deep knowledge of Mr. Pramit Pal about Nigeria. And when you look at it, I think India and Nigeria has come a long way. Even before we got our independence in 1960, I recall that India had established a trading office in Lagos, Nigeria in 1958. And I can also say with every sense of pride in me that, but for Indian teachers, I don't think I'll be here talking as a diplomat. And you also see that Nigeria, it's about the biggest economy in Africa. We have the market, we have everything. And your book is about economic and whatever cooperation between India and Africa. I'm interested in knowing, because I know, yes, we have a lot in common. We have defense parks and everything. But at the level of economy, yeah, I'm saying this, we have a whole lot of Indian companies in Nigeria. And we have naturalized Indians in Nigeria. In fact, as a matter of fact, when I presented a paper in St. Christie University, I told them, well, might be a diplomat by name, but I feel more Indian. Because at a very young age, I had Indians that I was in their care. Looking at your book, I want to be sure how very soon, India will be taking over the presidency of G20. And the sad fact about this matter is we've been talking about debts and whatever. And all of the money that most of these African countries is making is being used to finance these debts. I don't see any angle or any space for development if we just keep paying and paying and paying. And also, we talk about the issue of COVID, because I don't think there's any country that stood with the world in terms of COVID more than India. I say this with every sense of responsibility, because other countries were making the vaccines and keeping it to themselves. I think up to today, they are still in their warehouses. But India reached out. Granted, there was a crisis, but I can tell you how India was able to overcome that crisis. Even far developed countries would have been overwhelmed. So here I am very much interested in your book. And why I'm asking this, I want to know in your book whether you have looked at you have periscoped the Nigerian economy, which is about the largest in Africa, vis-a-vis the Indian engagement. Because when you look at it, yes, how come some of these countries are moving towards China?
So can you limit your question?
Sorry.
Yeah, we have to.
Sorry
all of
for
them might like to respond.
sorry when it gets to talking about India, I'm very passionate. Yes, I'm sorry about that.
Yeah.
So I think
Yeah.
it's good to look at these issues. What is making some of the African countries move towards China rather than India? I thank you all.
Thank you. Ambassador, could you please make your question?
It's much more some comments, not necessarily a question. Certainly by listening to all of you, then you feel that reading this book becomes a must. I had the privilege of getting a copy last week. I didn't have much time also to go through it, but I was, as they say in French, flown over a few of the pages. What I like about the book is the title itself. That is the sense of solidarity. That should characterize the relations between the two parts. Second thing, and I am happy also on that side because the perception is changing, that we no longer, and then this, I will touch upon it in the next session, we no longer look always to Africa as a problem, but part of a solution, which my dear friend Pramit has brilliantly mentioned, that there are some given facts which people should look at them differently. And I think the last two difficulties which have related to COVID and also to the crisis between Ukraine and then Russia has changed the priorities, and I'm quite happy that these priorities, based on the census he did and then the asking people. But I have two observations. First one, does India really have, because 54 countries of all Africa are different, diversified. Yet in some of the regions they have a common thing. That is the north, the east, the west, and then the south, maybe the Central Africa. Does India have a different foreign policy for this reason? Because you cannot have one single policy all over 54 countries, which I didn't seem to have at least sensed in the speeches. Second observation is related also to the last week we had a wonderful book launched by the minister as well on Africa. Then my feeling is that both Their Excellency, the ambassadors who produced them, they're still part of the administration somehow. They're still part of the bureaucracy somehow. So whatever their judgments always, there is, even in transparency, even being very clear about it. But still, you cannot just dismiss 40 or 42 years of your life with making things. So my hope is that to see some book with one day, a private sector based from their own experiences, and then the proposals from somebody off the ground, or at least some good think tank which is not linked to the government. I'm not requesting, I'm just thinking what would be in this, because in the last two books, last week and this week, we feel that also they are going in the same direction. I thank you so much.
Thank you. So I think we are short of time, but I'll take one last question, sir, and then, yes, you please.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Excellencies. I have one question regarding the South-South cooperation and the leadership of India in leading the conceptualization of these notions of the effectiveness of South-South cooperation. We know that in the other side, the concept of development cooperation led by the OECD, which is getting momentum through the Global Partnership for Effectiveness of Development Cooperation. We know that in this side, we have development coordination, aid harmonization, you have this management for result conception, have in-the-ground coordination with meetings coordinated by the World Bank and the main leading countries of the OECD. How India sees the future in terms of the concept of South-South cooperation beyond these notions of solidarity and non-interference and all what goes with South-South cooperation. At one time, I've seen India leading the South-South cooperation through the Delhi process with the work of Professor Chaudhary. Now I'm personally seeing it less. How do you see this? Especially the work of conceptualization of the effectiveness and the increasing of the impact, and then lastly also the work of networks like the NEST network of South think tanks. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I think all the questions are directed to
No,
you,
I
and
think
you're
we
most
could answer some.
competent to. You're the most competent to answer.
I will answer some.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So the professor who asked about women's issues, thank you for showing interest in that. So women's issue, to be honest, is a not high foreign policy priority for India. But in our development engagement with Africa, it has featured. So if you look at the ITEC program, and I strongly advise you to look at the ITEC website, you will see programs like Women in Business, how to protect women in the workplace, and many such things, which were actually very important, and trainings were imparted on this. The second part is, earlier Jaya Jetli ji was here, but when we had the civil service initiative, the civil society initiative, almost all of them were actually women focused. The Barefoot College lighting up, the training solar mamas was entirely focused on rural women and training them. The Seva project was also on women's empowerment in different places, as was the Dastkari Haat Samiti work with women artisans. So these were specialized programs, but were empowering women on the ground. So I just want to be clear, India would never interfere into politically empower any segment of African society. That we would leave to Africa to do. But if we could bring developmental aspects to them and improve their capacities to enter the trade or do better, that I think is what we are focusing on. Even the Sita program to improve in Rwanda and Kenya, the marketability of textiles is also actually very much women-based. All these are in the book. So I'm just now looking across, but yes, women's issues as one go doesn't feature anywhere. Nandita, you asked about lines of credit. There is no impact assessment of the lines of credit. The only impact assessment we have is that we made friends in 41 countries. And many of them, as Mr. Harsh Shingla said, you also said, that countries we never went to before. So we made friends with them. Somewhere down the line, and the book discusses this, that there was a proposal to have an impact assessment. Why it didn't happen, also the book mentions. So I'm not going to reveal it now, the secrets of the book go out. But I think there is a requirement for impact assessment. We all say that a process is consultative and in line. So it is consultative with the governments, and the governments seem very satisfied. I mean, Ambassador Tizieta from Ethiopia is here. Her predecessor, I've quoted her extensively in the book, who speaks about the success from the government's point of view of the LOC projects in that country. And I think that's where we need to differentiate between the G2G and whether civil society should engage at the other level. Cyber security, I'm going to leave to Pramit to answer. I think our friend from Nigeria. Sir, there is a lot of Nigeria in my book. You are a leading trade partner. We have a lot of investments there. I think India is the second largest job creator of all foreign investors in Nigeria. It's all in the book. But you did ask me two specific things. One about debt. In my book, there are many suggestions about how we need to be conscious about debt stress in Africa and move to alternate models. I'll just leave it there. Second thing, you asked me about China and India. I can tell you, I have worked on Africa in government from 1995 to 2012. I never thought even one day, oh, China is doing this, I need to do better. I didn't require it. I believe our model is better. It goes further. It is more people-oriented. It creates more local jobs. It is an India-Africa Harambee model. I don't need to go to anybody. The success of that came because all the Western countries came to us saying, will you work with us in Africa? This trilateral cooperation stemmed from that, saying, your model works. Can we do it with you? That is the ultimate salute to our model, sir. Now, when it comes to our colleague from Morocco, is it? Yes, sir. Yes, they are different strokes. So originally when the India-Africa Forum Summit was created, it had a three-tier program. There was an African Union or Pan-African level, there was a regional economic community level, and there was a bilateral level. The delivery at the AU level and the REX level was not very good, and the book critically analyzes this, where we were failed in our efforts. In 2011, we had offered 100 institutions to Africa. Most of them were at the level of the REX and the African Union. What we did bilaterally did much better, but somehow the countries did not take ownership of what the REC or the AU was offering them. And there is a problem within Africa in that, which we are not responsible for, but we are aware of this problem. Therefore, by the time the third summit comes, and I think I see Naftej here who was leading as a secretary over there, I think we turned almost entirely bilateral because we saw that the three-tier system was not working. So we recognize three tiers, but it is for Africa now to persuade us that all three will work equally, and then we will engage with them equally. On South-South, I'm going to leave it to Thank you.
We'll let Pramit speak first and then you can.
So I'll just talk about the cyber issue. Yes, I think that the issue of disinformation on the internet is something that's universal. Every single country has this problem, and African countries are not different. I mean, I can just list off the top of my head right now. There's been a running battle now between France and Russia in the Sahel region, and the French have accused the Russians of pretending to be Malians on Twitter and claiming that the French carried out atrocities, killing Malians and so on. And so you now see that there's been a running battle across the Sahel from Chad all the way down to Mali between these two countries, and it's spread all across the internet now. I would say almost every major election in Africa sees the same problem we see in India, where parties or individuals try to set up a narrative that is often partly fictional, partly factual. There's even a bizarre battle between Russia and the Ukraine taking place, where Russia and the Ukrainians are both trying to get Africans to support their position, even though a lot of the Africans have no stake in that battle whatsoever. So you have these little pockets of pro-Putin people in strange towns in Africa, as is happening even in India. Even though when you ask them what exactly is your interest in the war, they have no idea. They just see it on the net and they get excited. So you see that all across the board. The question is, what is the solution? And that's not clear to anybody. Every single country, no matter what their economic or technological status, is struggling with this. I think in India, what I've been seeing is what I would call big corporate NGO combinations in which something like Boom and so on, these are small NGO groups that dedicate themselves to tracking down stories and trying to find out if it's true. But the instruments that they use, because these are to be able to scour the entire internet requires both a lot of money and a lot of technology, is provided in partnership with companies like Facebook or Microsoft and so on, who do this on their own corporate social responsibility schemes. That if Microsoft says this is false, nobody's going to believe me. So I'm prepared to give the instruments on how to do this to an NGO, and they develop a credibility simply on the basis over time of how good and accurate they are in disproving disinformation that pops up. And I think that's a model that really is working. I know a number of my friends work in exactly this type of business right now in India. And I've asked them, they said, look, it's a slow process. It's, you've got several 100 million people on the internet. Your game is not to get the extremists on either side who are not going to change their point of view. The game is to get, if you wish, the sensible, moderate 400 million in the middle who are prepared to say this looks terrible and maybe it's true, maybe it's not. Let me go to 2 or 3 different groups that I know I can ask. I can literally send them an email or a Twitter message and say, is this accurate? And they'll say 24 hours later, no. And then they'll give them a thread. They'll say, this is where that picture comes from. It is taken from such and such place. The person who did this is a bot. He's not a real person. He's actually a robot. I mean, he's an internet robot that is paid for by X people. It's completely anonymized, so we don't know. So it's highly questionable. These other followers who've claimed and then retweeted it, each of them have 2 followers each, which is a clear sign normally that these persons are also created. That's the kind of model that I'm seeing slowly developing, definitely in India. And it's one that I feel that it'd be perfect to do something in Africa because it's a low capital, highly localized response to disinformation.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah, thank you, sir. So 2 points I would like to respond. One, of course, on the South-South cooperation, and you mentioned about the very foundation of South-South cooperation is the South-South solidarity. So that is still very important, and that has provided a strong foundation to this collaboration. But more importantly, if you see the last 2 decades, the content and substance of South-South cooperation has significantly changed. And if I can give you the example of India, for instance, all the schemes which we have launched with regards to Africa, the duty-free tariff preference scheme, which we never thought that a country like India, which still we are recipient of GSP, that is the unilateral preference by the Western, some of the large developed countries, and we are providing duty-free tariff preference to all the LDCs of the world. And that is one of the best schemes which India has, and any other developing country has provided. Easy to leverage, easy to accede and all. So, and if you look at the 3 India-Africa Forum Summit, the kind of resources we have allocated through LOCs and other means, that again quite noticeable. It's another thing that, of course, we have to look at its impact, its visibility, and where are the gaps. But still, we are moving in the right direction, and it is evolving. So, and at the same time, we are also talking about how we can partner with developed countries through the trilateral development cooperation. So things are evolving, changing, and we are in a very clear way, with very honest intention, we are trying to build this relationship very stronger. Now, coming to your point, ma'am, on the LOCs, and in fact, when we talk about LOCs, of course, government has its own thinking and priority to provide and help with the finances and all. But here the onus is on the private sector also, since I represent private sector. So one of the underlying objectives of the LOC is that to help Indian private sector to familiarize with the region and the market, which would help in taking a long-term decision in terms of investment, which unfortunately did not happen to the extent it should have happened. And that is where the other problems are, like business decision. Beyond a point, we cannot force the private sector because ultimately they have to take decision based on various factors. So, but of course, LOCs have definitely helped many Indian companies to understand the market well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we are really overshot the time, and sir, to be able to cover all the questions and the interest in the audience, may have to attempt another book. So, but thank you very much. I think you will have a lot of time during the break as well as in the next session to continue with your questions and observations on the book. Thank you very much, and congratulations for your.
Thank you. Let's